Hello, students! Today, we're going to explore one of the most important aspects of the English language, verb tenses. Verb tenses help us communicate when actions take place, and mastering them is crucial for effective communication. Let's start with the present simple tense. This tense describes actions that happen regularly or are in general. For example, I eat breakfast every morning. Why is it eat and not eats? Excellent questions. The subject-verb agreement rule states that for singular subjects, we add s or es to the verb. However, for plural subjects or I, we use the base form of the verb. Let's move on to the present continuous tense. This tense describes actions that are happening at the moment of speaking. For example, I am studying for my exam right now. Why do we use instead of is? That's because the present continuous tense uses the present tense of to be. Is, are, plus the ing form of the main verb. The correct form of to be depends on the subject. The present perfect tense. This tense describes actions that started in the past and continue up to the present moment. For example, I have studied English for 3 years. Why do we use have studied instead of studied? It's because the present perfect tense uses the auxiliary verb have plus the past participle of the main verb. So now let's move on to the present perfect continuous tense. This tense describes actions that started in the past and continue up to the present moment with an emphasis on the duration. For example, I have been studying English for 3 years. Why do we use have studying instead of studied? It's because the present perfect continuous tense uses the auxiliary verb have plus the past participle of to be, that is been, plus the ing form of the main verb. Next, we have the past simple tense. This tense describes complete actions in the past. For example, I went to the movies last night. Why do we use went instead of go? That's because the past simple tense often uses the past form of the verb, which can be regular, ed, or irregular change form. Now, let's look at the past continuous tense. This tense describes actions that were happening at a specific time in the past. For example, I was studying when my friend called. Why do we use was studying instead of studied? The past continuous tense uses the past tense of to be, was, were, plus the ing form of the main verb. Next, we have the past perfect tense. This tense describes actions that happened before another action in the past. For example, I had eaten dinner before I went to the movies. So, why we use had eaten instead of ate? Because the past perfect tense uses the auxiliary verb had plus the past participle of the main verb. Now let's look at the past perfect continuous tense. This tense describes the actions that started before another action in the past and continue after the point. For example, I had been studying English for 3 years before I moved to the United States. Why do we use had been studying instead of had studied? It's because the past perfect continuous tense uses the auxiliary verb had plus the past participle of to be, which is been plus the ing form of the verb. Moving on to the future simple tense, this tense describes actions that will happen in the future. For example, I will attend the meeting tomorrow. Why do we use will attend instead of attend? The future simple tense uses the auxiliary verb will plus the base form of the main verb. Let's examine the future continuous tense. This tense describes actions that will be happening at a specific time in the future. For example, I will be attending a conference next week. So, have you ever wondered why we use will be attending instead of will attend? Because the future continuous tense uses the auxiliary verb will plus the present continuous form of the main verb. Finally, let's examine the future perfect continuous tense. This tense describes actions that will continue up to the specific point in the future. For example, I will have been studying English for 5 years by the time I graduate. So, have you ever wondered why we use will have been studying instead of will study? Oh, it's because the future perfect tense It's because the future perfect continuous tense uses the auxiliary verb will plus the present perfect continuous form of the main verb. And that's a wrap, folks. Verb tense can be complex, but with practice, you'll become more confident in using them correctly. Remember to pay attention to subject-verb agreement and the correct form of the verb depending on the tense.